guys, welcome back to my channel. So I'm finally going to do my top books of 2022. Do you know how many times I've recorded this video or attempted to record this video and it just didn't happen due to various reasons? My phone going off, just random things keep popping up. All my other videos seem to go just fine, but this one? Nope. So let's see if I actually get it done this time. Okay, so I have 6 books on this list. It's just kind of what happened as I was going through my books for the year. Those are the 6 that stuck out to me. So here they are. I'm going to read the description for some of them because I just can't do it justice, or, it's just better that way. And I'm also going to tell you where I got the recommendation. I'm going to try to do that with all my videos. I like to tag my sources if I can, at least verbally. Anyway, so here we go. First book is Jefferson's Sons by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. This is recommended to me by Amanda from The Curly Reader. She's one of my favorite booktubers. She reads lots of historical fiction in middle grade, which is what drew me to her. I'll get into her more in a future video. I want to do one where I talk about some of my favorite booktubers. But anyway, let's get to this book. Here's a description. The untold story of Thomas Jefferson's slave children. Beverly, Harriet, Madison, and Easton are Thomas Jefferson's children by one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, and while they do get special treatment, better work, better shoes, even violin lessons, they are still slaves and are never to mention who their father is. The lighter-skinned children have been promised a chance to escape into white society. But what does this mean for the children who look more like their mother? As each child grows up, their questions about slavery and freedom become tougher, calling into question the real meaning of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, yeah, this description is pretty accurate. This book is a fictionalized portrayal of Thomas Jefferson's children with an enslaved woman, Sally Hemings. Obviously, we don't really know what it was like for any of them, but I think that the author really did a good job of portraying what it might have been like. She made it so it wasn't all black and white. Like, it wasn't all just, I hate you because we're slaves. Some of the children really did want their father's approval at one point. So, like, they felt love for him because he was their father. And they wanted his attention, his approval, hence violin lessons. Thomas Jefferson didn't give the violin lessons, but one of his sons wanted to play the violin because he did. And he liked the music. But yeah, it was definitely not all black and white. The children had to grapple with the fact that he mistreated other people, even if he treated them pretty decently. You know, some people were physically mistreated. So they had to accept that. They had to accept the fact that they were his slaves, even though they were his kids. And he enslaved other people too, so it was hard to read as they had to grapple with that, but I think the author really handled it pretty sensitively. The other thing they kind of had to grapple with, as I said in the description of this book, was that some of the children would be able to go into, well, they would be able to pass as white because they're lighter skinned, whereas other ones wouldn't. So those ones who couldn't pass had to deal with the resentment of knowing that their siblings were going to better lives at some point, and they couldn't. And so they had to deal with that. So, yeah, all in all, I really liked this book. It made me think a lot after I read it and while I was reading it. And, yeah, on another note, apparently it's difficult to get this book. It's out of print or something, according to Amanda. So I actually had a pretty easy time finding it. I got it on audio through Libby. So through the Libby app, the library app. But if you want it in print, it might be a bit harder to find. So But if you can get a hold of this book, I suggest you do because it's a really great book. Anyway, on to the next book. Any Other Family by Eleanor Brown. I got this one through Sarah's Bookshelves Live podcast. She talked about it in her summer preview. Okay, so here's a description for this one. They look just like any other family, but they aren't a family like any other. Not quite. Instead, they are 3 separate sets of parents who adopted 4 biological siblings, committing to keep the children connected after the death of their grandmother. Tabitha, who adopted the twins, is the planner of the group, responsible for coordinating play dates and birthdays and Sunday night dinners, insistent that everything happens just so. Quiet and steady Ginger, single mother to the eldest daughter, resists the forced togetherness, her own unsettled childhood leaving her wary of trusting too much. And Elizabeth is still reeling from going directly from failed fertility treatments into adopting a newborn, terrified that her unhappiness means she was not meant to be a mother at all. But when the 3 women receive a surprising call from their children's birth mother announcing she's pregnant again and wants them to help her find an adoptive family for this child too, the delicate bonds they are still struggling to form threaten to collapse. As tensions rise, the women reckon with their own feelings about what it means to be a mother and what they owe each other as a family. So I really enjoyed this book because it had a lot to do with adoption, and I've always liked stories about adoption, and I've been particularly interested in like open adoption, which this is totally an open adoption because they're in contact with their siblings. Like, that's the whole point of these 3 families being connected together, so that these siblings can be siblings and grow up together, even though they couldn't be adopted together. And so, yeah, like, I found that the adoption aspect interesting, but I also found the sibling aspect interesting. I'm the youngest, and I do have, quote unquote, half siblings. But my parents taught me from a very young age that you don't say that word. Like, that was a bad word in our household. That's your brother and that's your sister. And you do not say half, ever. I know that's not how everybody feels about it. I actually find it kind of interesting how many people say half sibling very comfortably. I mean, I'm not judging. I'm just saying that it's different. And so, yeah. But I have to admit, what I did judge a bit was the fact that, okay, I watched Teen Mom, you know, the MTV reality show of teen parents, and it always drove me bonkers how, like, the moms would get really petty when their exes would have kids, and they'd be like, that's not your sister, you know, and, like, they would make a thing of it, especially Chelsea. Sorry, Chelsea fans, you're mean to Paisley. Anyway, my point is that this book sort of made me realize that keeping siblings together isn't always easy, especially when there's a lot of them. I mean, and you really have to commit to it. Like Elizabeth and John, for example, one of the couples with the baby, they were considering moving to live near their parents, and they couldn't move because they'd be taking the baby away from her siblings. And their parents, like Elizabeth and John's parents, which are these babies' grandparents, were like, why do you care so much? Like, we're your family. Why is this such a thing? And so, yeah, like, it takes a lot of commitment. And then we have Ginger, who doesn't always want to be best buds with the other moms and be forced to do these weekly play dates and have her life mapped out because of these other kids. I guess what I'm trying to say is it made me realize that your kids having siblings that you don't, like, live with kind of sucks sometimes. And, like, you see how much it sucks, even if it's something that these people chose. Because in this particular case, this is not, like, angry exes having kids. These are 3 couples who agreed to keep these siblings together. They chose this, and now they're kind of seeing the consequences of their choice. And so that's what was really interesting about this book, is that you got to see, like I said, the consequences of deciding to keep these siblings. Once you decide that, you can't back down. And then you've got the birth mom who is pregnant again. And so now what do? Does one of them adopt the kid to keep them together? Or do we add couple number 4 to this insane family? It's just a lot. And in the case of exes, like in Teen Mom, what if one of the dads decides to have, I don't know, 4 or 5 kids with different people? How do you keep those siblings together? Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's more complicated than I thought to keep all the siblings together. And you really have to want to, and really have to commit to it without resentment. And they weren't always doing that. Oh, I forgot to say that this book actually takes place on a family vacation where these 3 couples go on vacation with all the kids. That wasn't in the description, but yeah, it's a 2-week time span, I think, where they're like all together, and that's how like all these resentments kind of bubble up because they're stuck together for too long. And so, yeah, like Tabitha is the mom who is all about keeping them together and like super committed to having family everything. And it drives the other 2 nuts because sometimes they want to be alone with their kids and not have to care about these other siblings that are taking over their lives and decisions and everything. So I guess it kind of just made me realize that having a lot of siblings, especially when those siblings don't reside in your home, can be really hard. So maybe I'll judge the moms on bad reality shows a little less for being mad about it. Anyway, there's that book. The next book that I loved was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. This is recommended also by Sarah's Bookshelves Live podcast. Although in this case, I was sort of convinced to read it by the author. Sarah had the author on the podcast for an interview, and the author kind of convinced me to read this book. I wasn't going to read it because, okay, I have nothing against women's rights. I am all for women's rights, but I am not a super uber feminist. In fact, a lot of the times I hate books where like the women are super feminist, because sometimes I don't necessarily disagree with the guys in the books and they make them out to be monsters. But no, in this case, all the guys were terrible and you had to like completely side with Elizabeth Zott, the main character in this book. I was surprised at how much I love this book because, again, this is not my thing. I resisted reading this forever until Sarah had the author on, and then I was like, okay, I'm reading this. I have to read this. So, here's a description. Chemist Elizabeth Zott is not your average woman. In fact, Elizabeth Zott would be the first to point out that there is no such thing as an average woman. But it's the early 1960s, and her all-male team at Hastings Research Institute takes a very unscientific view of equality. Except for one. Calvin Evans, the lonely, brilliant, Nobel Prize-nominated grudge holder who falls in love with, of all things, her mind. True chemistry results. But like science, life is unpredictable, which is why, a few years later, Elizabeth Zott finds herself not only a single mother, but the reluctant star of America's most beloved cooking show. Elizabeth's unusual approach to cooking, combine 1 tablespoon acetic acid with a pinch of sodium chloride, proves revolutionary. But as her following grows, not everyone is happy, because as it turns out, Elizabeth Zott isn't just teaching women to cook. She's daring them to change the status quo. So yeah, basically this is about a chemist who somehow, I'm not going to tell you how, that'd be spoiling, ends up on a cooking show, and basically her cooking show is kind of teaching these women all about science, and she doesn't talk down to them like you would like, back then, you know, the 1960s housewife just stays home and cooks and cleans and changes diapers. And I'm not, like, belittling that. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And, you know, I am all for the stay-at-home mom. You do whatever you want. I'm just saying that she didn't treat them like they were just staying at home doing that. She treated them like they would know what she meant with the big words, and like they all had this huge college education, and she just treated them all the same. And they respected her for it, and they loved her for it. And that's how she got a huge following. But she wasn't your traditional cooking instructor. I mean, the woman cooked with a Bunsen burner and a lab coat. And the people in the cooking show that produced the cooking show weren't exactly too thrilled, even though she had a pretty good following. But yeah, this is a really great book in general. I loved all the characters. I loved her friend that she made, her next door neighbor. I loved her daughter. I love her daughter's name. I'm not going to tell you the daughter's name because it's spoilery, and it's a very unusual name. I loved her dog. Her dog's name is 630. That's right, 630. And I won't tell you why that is either because, again, spoiler. But 630 had his own perspective in the book, and 630 was a very smart dog. So, and then there's Calvin, the kind of love story in the book. He was great too. But again, I'm not going to tell you how that goes. It's hard to really describe this book without getting too spoilery. So I'll just leave it there. But suffice it to say that this book really surprised me with how much I loved it. Because I was not expecting to love it. I was expecting to kind of be like, okay, this guy wasn't that bad. Calm down. No. The guys in this book, apart from Calvin and a couple other ones, were jerks. And they deserved all the scorn given to them. So, that was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. Next book is Roots by Alex Haley. I actually saw the TV show for this because I had to watch it for a class. I never read the book, though, until this year. Katie Cobb from the Currently Reading podcast kept recommending it, and I finally read it, and I loved it. This is basically Alex Haley's family story. Like going back a ton of generations. It starts off with this boy named Kunta Kinte in Africa. Jufur, Africa? I can't pronounce the name of the place. But basically, we read about his childhood there. And then he gets basically kidnapped and taken to be enslaved here in the U.S. And we kind of see his story and the story of his children and grandchildren and all of that unfold. Like how he adjusts to life here, and then we get to hear from his daughter and her kids and her grandkids. It's a sweeping family saga. It's not all depressing. I mean, there are some hard parts in it. Obviously, we're talking about slavery, but it really, you could see how much his family loved each other too throughout this book. Even throughout the hard parts. And I really enjoyed it a lot. It was definitely way better than the TV show. This book is huge, though, so you might want to read it slowly so you kind of get everything you want out of it. I am not one to read slowly, but even I had to read this slowly. I think it took me a month to get through this book, but yeah, I would also listen to it on audio. I'm not sure how you can do that, though, because it's no longer available on Audible or Libro FM. I don't know why. Thankfully, I found it on CD. Yes, I have a DVD player that plays CDs. I'm not that old, but I have one, and I still use some CDs. So, yeah, I listened to it on CD, but I actually found it recently on Libby, so maybe your library will have an audio copy. It helps with the pronunciation of some of the words. And so, yeah, I definitely recommend the audio. So that was Roots by Alex Haley. Next book is a middle grade book. It's called A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. This was also recommended to me by Katie from Currently Reading Podcast. And this is another book where I was not sure I would like it. I'll read the description and then, yeah, I'll kind of go into it. A neurodivergent girl campaigns for a memorial when she learns that her small Scottish town used to burn witches simply because they were different. Ever since Miss Murphy told us about the witch trials that happened centuries ago, right here in Juniper, I can't stop thinking about them. Those people weren't magic. They were like me, different like me. I'm autistic. I see things that others do not. I hear sounds that they can ignore. And sometimes I feel things all at once. I think about the witches, with no one to speak for them. Not everyone in our small town understands. But if I keep trying, maybe someone will. I won't let the witches be forgotten, because there is more to their story, just like there is more to mine. Okay, I'm getting teary-eyed just from reading the description. I never read this description before. Like, on the back of the book, I kind of just took Katie's description and I wasn't sure if I would like it, because I'm not really that into witch burnings, but I decided to read it anyway, and bawled my eyes out in the process of it. I don't know what it's like to be neurodivergent. I have my own other issues, but I really appreciate the message that she wanted to memorialize the witches because she felt that they were given a bad lot in life because they were different like she was. And she also felt persecuted the same way that they persecuted her. Like, that's what made this book really hard, is that you see, like, not just her classmates persecute her, but her teachers too. Like, it's awful. That's why it made me cry a couple of times. And I didn't understand why she was so passionate about the witches, but as I read the book, I really got to understand why she cared so much. Like, why it mattered that they be remembered as something other than just, like, weirdos that got burned. It just, you know, because she's worried, what will they remember her as being? And so, yeah, it was a really difficult book to read for me, but it was also a really good book, and it kept me thinking for a long time after I read it. So, yeah, definitely a book that made my list. There were a lot of other good characters in it. She had a teacher. One of her teachers was it a yard teacher? It was somebody at school who was really good to her. And, oh no, it was a librarian. What am I, crazy? It was a librarian. He was really good to her, and I appreciate good librarians. And her parents were good and supported her endeavors, and she has an older sister who is also neurodivergent, who is a big character. All in all, I think, honestly, this would probably be my number one book on this list now that I'm talking about it. If I had them in an order, this would definitely be my best book of the year. So that is A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. The last book on my list is The Only Plane in the Sky by Garrett Graff, I think is how you pronounce his name. Basically, this is the story of 9/11. This author combined a bunch of interviews and basically took us step by step through the whole thing. It's hard to describe. Even in the description, just, it's hard to talk, like, to describe what you're getting. It's definitely best to read this on audio. I mean, I did both. I followed along in the Braille copy, but you get a lot. In the audio, it's a full cast recording, and you get to hear some of the voicemails and the phone calls that were recorded during that time. And it explains why things happened, how things happened, step by step, literally sometimes minute by minute. It was a really long book, and like 5 hours in, you were still at like 8:30 in the morning. I'm exaggerating, but yeah. But I think it was a book I needed to read. I was 10 when 9/11 happened, but as a blind person, I didn't really understand it, and I don't think my parents wanted me to understand it at the time. This is going to sound really insensitive, but when it was happening, I heard that planes were crashing. They told me planes were crashing. That's why they were upset. And all I thought was, okay, that sucks, but cars crash all the time. People die. Like, why is this such a thing? And I never wanted to find out because I always hated to see people cry, and people would always cry when I would ask questions about it. So I didn't ask questions about it. I just wanted it all to go away. And I didn't understand. And I mean, like I said, I don't think they wanted me to. Because I remember at the time they also said, this is one time when I'm really glad you can't see what we're seeing on TV. And they never described it at all. So I did not understand what was happening, how these people died. Horrific deaths until I read this book and got to read eyewitness accounts word for word about their experiences. Like, I just knew, all I knew before I read this book this September was that the planes crashed. I knew nothing else, and I never wanted to know anything else before. And then I read this book, and it was like, wow. I mean, how did I not want to know before this? And it made me feel bad that I didn't ever really look into it much. I mean, obviously, as I grew older, I kind of knew that there was lots of people died, and that was very sad, but I never got, like, into it the way that everybody else did because they had to watch it on TV. And I partly do blame my blindness for it, and partly just my parents not explaining it, because who wants to explain to your kid, like, literally describe detail by detail people? Well, if you know, you know. But if your kid doesn't know, you probably don't want to tell them about it or describe what you're watching on the TV. So, yeah, I understand why they didn't describe it to me. It's just that I didn't really get an idea until I read this. So, yeah, that definitely had a huge impact on me, and I will probably be reading more books about it in the future. So, wow, I should not have ended on this note. That was sad. How did I pick my two saddest books for last? But anyway, those are my top books of 2022. I hope you enjoyed this video, even the sad parts. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you in my next video. Bye!
Start recording video.